And welcome to this week's Mailbox. And this week's the comments are mostly about the development of Battle for Azeroth. It's very close now, particularly the class design based on a video I was doing last week. And also World of Warcraft lore again. That seems to be a running theme at the moment. Hi, so first things first, where's the mailbox? This is the one from last week. I ought to say as well, I had a lot of comments about last week's going, no, it wasn't Karanos, it was Thelsamar, which it was, actually. I'm sorry, I got that one. I don't know what, well, I sort of know, I don't know what happened. I'd planned it for it to be Karanos. I don't know why. I think I must have changed my mind and got bored and thinking I'm not flying all the way to Karanos, I'll just do it in Thelsamar or something. I've changed my system now, so when I make the screenshots, I name them at the point I'm making them instead of, because I had it on a list in terms of planned ones. So, but this one, there were a number of people who got this one right. It was a bit disappointing, really. I thought it was in the arse end of nowhere, going to Desolus. But no, apparently, as someone said there, the bones gave it away. It was Carnum's Glade, and it was in Desolus, indeed. I suppose I don't know, now that I've gone Horde, I don't really know which ones are the obscure ones, because I've never really levelled as Horde properly. I technically started Legion as Horde, as I'll be starting Battle for Azeroth as Horde, but, you know, there you go. So well done to those people. Now, this week's is here. So, what we need for the where the mailbox, you need to put comments below. You need to say exactly where it is. Now, when I say exactly where it is, I just mean the town or village or settlement and the zone. Only need those two bits. I don't need you to tell me, oh, and you're facing south-southwest or anything like that. Just the name of the settlement and the zone for this one there. So that's this week's. Anyway, on to some questions or statements or something, which I can't find. There we go, first one. So first one, watched it twice looking for a second clue. So this is the competition that I announced last week. There's only one clue a week, so there was a video last week out with a clue, which means there's not going to be another one until next week, although next week is technically from tomorrow, so you can be watching out for that one. For those who don't know, you'd have to check back to last week's mailbox to get the details of it. I'm not going over it again. But essentially, there will be a random clue in a video, a World of Warcraft video, because I'm not just doing World of Warcraft videos anymore, each week. For 4 weeks. Obviously last week's now gone, the next week's going to be the second week, and all four together are related to a person, a place, or like an event. So you've got to sort of say what it is that links the four clues. And clue number 2 is coming out next week, so that's on that one. So there is only one clue a week. I'm not going to be sneaky there. I may be sneaky and put them out on videos on different days, but I'm not, although there's only so many general WoW videos I do, so I can't be that sneaky with it. Right then, so first actual thing. Rather than knowing what they want, Blizzard is tinkering with 1,000 different things to see whether I like it or not. This is exactly why Warlords were so horrible, and now they're doing it again. I mean, the tinkering is true. The tinkering is certainly true. They very frequently... They sort of seem to do what I did last summer with the channel, which is to come up with a nice plan, you know, and then just abandon it. But instead of tweaking the plan, they just abandon it and make it up as they go along. And they make... It's very difficult for me to know because I don't know exactly how it works. I sometimes hear about certain things that they're thinking of, but I don't know how the design teams actually work on the inside. I can't be a fly on the wall or anything. But it does seem to me that there are certain people who will just change things at a drop of a hat. You know, they'll just have a thought, oh, let's just change it to this. And that, I'm guessing, gives everyone else the ump, because that means they've all then got to change what they've been doing. However, in terms of linking it to Warlords, I don't think that's true at all. Warlords wasn't a problem with tinkering. Warlords was a problem with their big features were unpopular. And they looked at the situation in Warlords and thought, can we rescue this? And I think they thought in Warlords, in fact I don't think, I sort of semi-know, that they looked at the situation and went, look, you know, what we're planning on still doing in Warlords, even if we deliver it, is still going to be unpopular, because the whole, we've basically, I think Blizzard basically misjudged the entire thing. So they decided to cut their losses and put more resources into Legion. So the fact that Legion's much better is not just because, you know, they had better ideas. It's because they had more time and development and resources into it as well. So that's all that was, really. But the tinkering certainly is true. That they do that. Because what happens is they come up with this design philosophy. And then, you know, people are saying, well, this isn't going to work. So then they start defending it. So that wastes a certain amount of time. Then it's shown to them in no uncertain terms that it's not going to work at all. They start to come around to that idea. So instead of abandoning it, I'm not saying they should always just drop every idea that's not quite going to work. You know, if you can refine it and come up with something that will work, that's fine too. But when you have to put like, oh, well, let's fix this bit here and this bit there, and when you start doing that and putting sticking plasters on sticking plasters on sticking plasters, then you need to think to yourself, actually, this whole thing is clearly not working. If you have to make 100 different minor changes to make the whole thing work, it's not working. You know, so it's better to abandon it and then work on it later on. But that's not what they do. So they do, yeah, the tinkering is certainly true. That's what they do. And it's why, you know, everything is just sort of YOLO'd there in terms of the design. And then why they run out of time with it, because there was no real plan. Or at least what plan there was abandoned, and no one sort of came up with a new plan. The new plan was just make it up as we go along. Actually, I think that bringing back alternate Draenor is their chance to fix some story here. So I ought to probably see this by just explain. I was never a fan, even before World of Draenor expansion was clear that it was going to be unpopular. I was never a fan of the story. I'm not really a fan of time travel in fantasy stories unless you're going to do it well. And it's very difficult to do it well. And I'm not a fan of the alternate universe thing. So combining both of them, you know, occasionally get away with it. Doctor Who's got away with it in a couple of stories. Back to the Future did it well, you know. But generally speaking, it's not done well. So I wasn't a big fan of it at all. So I was under the assumption that after Worlds of Draenor, Blizzard had agreed that we can just pretend it didn't happen. Unfortunately, we can't now because they're bringing it back. I mean, the Magyar Orcs is what started it off. Of course, we could have got those from our own Draenor, Outland. But no. And they've started to do other things with other characters from there as well. So it says, actually, I think bringing back alternate Draenor is their chance to fix some story there. What they are doing so far, at least, seem pretty interesting. But I do not, because almost never when people in general do alternate universe stuff, it almost never works out well, and I don't think it's going to here. So I'm disappointed. Anyway, on to the next thing. It says, also, all the thing about Naru good, Void bad depends on perspective. Naru are good in their way. Could be that Chronicles is written from the perspective of someone that sees things that way, maybe a Titan or something. To which I sort of had to respond there. I don't think so. I do think, and I said this in response, Blizzard will come up with some nonsense. If they're going to... Obviously, we know Zera... We can't really consider Zera to be benevolent, because that's the word that's used to describe Naru. And you know, it always annoys me when some people come up with things, oh, I don't believe this is right in the law and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, the first 6 pages of the Warcraft Chronicles lay out the cosmology of the Warcraft universe. It's just laid bare. Really annoying. But then when people don't read those 6 pages... I know not everyone's got the Chronicles, but still. But then when Blizzard sort of semi-contradicted themselves, so they describe Naru as being benevolent. Now, Zera, yes, Zera's actions you could not describe as benevolent. But Zera is one Naru, okay? The Naru in general we've not really had a problem with. So then we start to think, okay, so if they're going to go down a different road with it, which would be a very interesting road to take, as I say, I link it very much to the Babylon 5 storyline. But if they're going to go down that road, then that contradicts the thing in there. And I have no doubt that Blizzard will come up with some explanation, because I cannot express how often Blizzard do a mindless thing just to avoid having to admit that they mess something up. You know, they usually only admit they got something wrong long after the event. Such as, for example, in Legion, you know, they were talking about class fantasy all the time. In the first Q&A that Ian Hazacostas did for BfA, when Legion's basically done, he did concede that they kept using the term class fantasy when in actual fact they were focusing too much on specs instead of classes. He conceded that. But it's the sort of thing you would never concede at any time during the development of Legion. So they come out with all this stuff for each expansion. People argue against it, and other people go, no, 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 Blizzard said this. At the end of the expansion, when a lot of people have forgotten about it, Blizzard will concede the things they got wrong. But then they'll still get other things wrong, and the whole hideous cycle carries on and on and on. But they never, with Warcraft Chronicles, they're supposed to be set in stone. If they come out and say, yeah, do you know what? We've already contradicted page 4 of the first volume. What's that going to mean for the hype when Chronicles Volume 4 wants to come out? It all sounds pretty silly. So I'm sure they'll come up with some nonsense to justify it. But it's not written from something's point of view. It's written very objectively is the problem with it. It says, because yes, Chronicle tends to be neutral most of the time. It's supposed to be written objectively, that's the whole point. But cut off some really important information that suppose the writer didn't know or want to know. I mean, the impression you very much get from this, because how can we know what the Void want? How can anyone write it? But the book tells us exactly what the Void wants. The only person who really properly knew with the Titans, I suppose, because Sargeras tortures some Nathrazim. I mean, that's another thing that's been retconned. The Nathrazim to tell them what... But, the Nathrazim wouldn't necessarily know that much anyway. They only know what they need to know. So it's all very weird. And it says, not saying Chronicle is wrong, it just lacks information. But, if they go down the road of Naru and the Void basically both being effectively neutral, they're not good or bad. They just want their things, and we're just in the way. In the same way that a fly can be in the way and you swat it. It's not evil. It's not particularly nice, but it's not evil as such. And maybe the Void's the same thing. We're just in the way of their plans. And. But if they do that, then they're contradicting what they said. Because they didn't have to describe the Naru as benevolent. That's the maddening thing in here. If when they were writing Warcraft Chronicles 1, they thought to themselves, well, we're not really sure where we're going with the Naru. They could have just described them as beings of the light and left it at that. Fine, that's all fine. But no, they described them as benevolent. Or they didn't even, qualify it by saying, frequently benevolent to the mortal races or anything like that. It's now benevolent, simple, objective, and now potentially wrong. Oh dear. Next one. It says, this was the first time I was invited to Alpha and Beta and I didn't want to play them because of the lack of new class designs and you're leveling the allied races. It says, I don't want to get burnt out on BfA leveling too quickly. A lot of people always think that. It's actually really weird. I have a very different experience because I will level multiple characters up through an alpha and a beta. I haven't actually done quite so many this time around, but I've done several still. Most, they keep wiping them. I mean, that doesn't help. But I've leveled quite a few. And I often do this. And when the game goes live, I don't really actually get bored from leveling up for the first few characters because it is actually a really different experience. Obviously, the closer you get to launch, the more similar the leveling experience is to what will actually be the case. But when you first level up early alpha, very, very different. So it's extremely different. But then I quickly get bored once it is live because then it is basically the same. You can do things in a different order, sure, and there's more than enough quests to level up. You are going to have to leave some quests out. So you can give your characters a different experience, but I do get bored then. But I don't get bored while it's in alpha and beta because it's changing. Plus, I suppose it's because I'm deliberately on the lookout for things to report, which also makes it a different experience. But I can understand some people not wanting to burn themselves out there when it goes live. It's like, don't want to do it. So since there's no significant class changes, want to find some sort of immersion. Well, there are for some classes, but potentially not for others. I guess it will only be from the new quests. But then there's this statement here. BfA, in my opinion, is starting to look simpler and boring compared to Legion. Now, there's a few things that people have said, and I wish they would clarify it. Hopefully they'll clarify it. One of them is this, because I look at it and I think, well, I don't see it being simpler as such, because the only thing that's been removed from BfA compared to Legion are artifacts. But we have a similar system in terms of Azeroth traits. In addition to which, other things that, we've still got Mythic Plus dungeons. We've still got the raids in the same sort of way. Sorry if you can hear a dog barking, but, it never shuts up. We've still got world quests. In addition, we're getting the war fronts and we're getting the islands. So I don't know about it being simpler. It's only simpler, I suppose, in terms of the fact that we have this one neck to put our artifact power on instead of 2 to 4 different weapons. But I don't think that made it more complicated. That just made it more annoying for people who wanted to play multiple specs on their class. So I don't think it is simpler. Whether it's boring, of course, is going to be entirely subjective. I would say that the storylines are more interesting in BfA from my point of view, which is just an opinion, than they were in Legion. I didn't find them as engaging in Legion, the quest storylines. In BfA, they're much better. And I still have to say that I believe the Alliance ones are better than the Horde ones, with the exception that the Horde get one interesting quest line in Nazmir, which you can easily miss out, because I found the best way to level at the moment, I don't know that it's definitely the min-maxy way to do it, is just to do main quest lines, none of the side quest lines, main quest lines in each of the 3 zones and your own faction, and make sure you do the opposite faction zones as well, and make sure all that's done before you get to level cap, and then your world quest open, and then do what you want. So you could easily miss it out. It's all gods related. But yeah, in terms of simpler, I'm not quite sure, because it's not the first person I've heard say this, and I'd be quite curious to know what things people think are simpler. Because to me, BfA really just builds on what Legion was. It's often they do this with expansions. Like if they think a particular expansion worked quite well, they just build on it for the next one. So you often get double, and then maybe they think people have got bored with it, or they need to refresh it, or they get new people in, or something like that, and it gets shaken up in a following expansion. But this one I see has been very, very similar to Legion. It's got the islands in addition. It's got the warfront, the Azeroth traits as opposed to, you know, the legendary system, I suppose, is gone. But again, that didn't make it more complicated. It was just like, well, these are the content that can give you a legendary. Do all of them. At least that's gone. So certain elements of frustration have hopefully gone. I hope it's not going to be added to with the islands and the warfronts. But we will see. Right, a couple of sort of channel-y questions then. So, as some of you may notice, there's been slightly different format the last couple of weeks. I have to hope I can maintain it. It says, really digging this style, fast-paced with not many breaks between subjects. Would be nice to have these kinds of videos every now and then. However, then you also get statements like this. It says, just my 2 cents. I like it more when the video takes longer to watch, but the style is one of the mailbox, blah, blah, blah. Miss the mailbox. We don't have to miss the mailbox because it's every week. And I don't think I've missed one out. But, yeah, I've, as long as the channel has been going, had these opposite statements. Some people who want short videos and some people who want longer videos. So what I've thought of is, right, okay, the only way to get a short video is to script it effectively, unless you're just talking about like one thing that will take you 10 seconds to say and you string it out to 2 minutes in some way. But generally speaking, the only way is to script it, which is why these go on for so long. And so what I've thought of is, because it's like there was a French mathematician, I've forgotten which one. It might have been Pascal, but it was definitely a French mathematician who was reputed to have written a letter to his friend once, and he started it off by saying, "My apologies that this letter is so long, but I didn't have time to make it shorter." And that is sort of the way. It sort of sounds paradoxical at first, but it's not. It's because if you're going to say something, you might take half an hour to say. In theory, sometimes you can get it down to like 10 minutes, but you have to script it, and then you have to go through it, and you have to go, do I really need to say that? Because sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't. And then sometimes you actually need to add things, or you know, it takes a few drafts to get it just right. And even then, I don't get it always just right, because time is a factor. So what I am looking at the moment is, just cut a long story short, on different days, different videos. So Monday and Friday, general WoW videos. They may be guides, they may be discussions. At the moment, they're more discussion based. Saturdays, of course, the Retribution Paladin video of some description. Sunday's Mailbox. Tuesday is the Azeroth review. I mean, that's going to go on forever. That's going to go on for 2 hours, come what may. That's just the way that is. That's, of course, live, and then it goes on YouTube after it. Wednesday and Thursday are my non-Warcraft stuff, so the Lord of the Rings and the Warhammer stuff, which are also quite short, but of course they're not World of Warcraft. So the idea is that you've got the Mailbox and the Azeroth review are definitely going to be longer videos. The Monday and Friday World of Warcraft ones should be, generally speaking, under 10 minutes. They will be scripted, though. So unless it's a very wide-ranging discussion, it's going to be under 10 minutes. And then the Retribution Paladin video will be whatever, because that tends to be more discussion-based. That's not going to ever be scripted, even though some person on the comments this week wanted it to be, because that's not. So that is an actual discussion, except when it's a guide, in which case it may be scripted or it may not. So I am trying to do a variety there in answer to that one. Right, next one. So it's a very interesting discussion. This is again the class design thing. I don't see how this could have been avoided. Once they decided to strip classes down and put abilities, talents and rotation changes onto artifacts and gear, they created a mess and to some extent tied the hands of their class designers. I don't understand why they keep reinventing the wheel, or in what often comes to the same thing, going back to their roots and reviving old concepts, which don't belong in the modern game. We had playable, enjoyable specs. It's not like they can't give that to us. Now, when I want to change specs, I'll be carrying around piles of extra gamer bags to do it, as if we couldn't say put all those things in the talents where at least they don't take up bag space. If they want to design this way in a world where things really shouldn't take up space at all, please get me a valet. I very much agree with this in many ways. In fact, I've got a video that I've just done and coming out tomorrow. Scripted one, so a shortish one, under 10 minutes, which I did last week, on this class uniqueness thing and the overall concept of class design. But I very much... The problem is that Blizzard have painted themselves in the corner. We've had so many expansions now that there's certain things that we expect of them that are not necessary. One of them is class design. They don't... All they should need to do... Like, the game, in essence, doesn't really change. You know, the sort of things that our classes need to be able to cope with for doing PvP, dungeons, raids, you know, solo content, whatever content. And, of course, I should have split PvP into battlegrounds and arenas and duels and stuff like that. But I'm not a PvP player. All those sort of things. They don't really change at all. So why do classes have to change every bloody expansion? And they keep saying things like, oh, you know, this expansion is going to be a major revamp. This expansion, not so much. But every expansion is very different to the last one. And there is no need for it. What they should do is work at making the classes, well, work. And that's it. And if actually a particular class and spec played very well in one expansion, don't change it the next expansion. Because it was already fine. Leave it. Just leave the bloody thing alone. That would be the best thing. But the problem is that... Oh, I've gone blurry. That Blizzard have this thing where every expansion, class design is there. To the point where now players, whenever a new expansion is announced, they're immediately trying to find out what are the classes like. As soon as Alpha goes live and some people are able to play it. Ooh, what's changed about, you know, Assassination Rogue, or what's changed about Frost Mages? That's the thing that people wanted to find out, because they know it's going to happen, and that shouldn't be the case. And what it means is, as you say there, it puts unnecessary stresses on the class designers, some of whom are new to the class design team this expansion. So they're inheriting a load of problems. It's not even like, well, you know, you chose to do this, so you can deal with it. You know, because that's what you can normally do. If a team stays the same, it'd be a case of, well, you shat the bed, you clean the sheets. But it's not, you know, it's different. Some different people in. The people who caused the mess have buggered off, and new people are in now. I'm not saying that none of the people who caused the mess are still there, but some new ones have come in anyway, and not been given the resources needed. So, yeah, I totally agree with that completely. And also I agree, because this is a point I'm going to be making tomorrow, that the differences between those specs should be in the talents. But I've talked about that in a stream as well. I'm going to talk about it in a video. A lot of people are going to disagree with that one. Yeah, tomorrow is going to be a lot of people disagree. But there you go, never mind. So yeah, I have to agree with that. And also, just I think it's going to come up in a later one as well. Just on the general thing of artifacts, they said right from the start, and to be fair, I believe them because they did say it before Legion even came out. They weren't planning on having artifacts last more than one expansion. That alone they were asking for trouble with that, asking for trouble. But anyway, right, okay. So a bit of a lore-y one. So the Void can corrupt the undead. The only reason people say it can't is because the Scourge. Which even then wasn't entirely true. They could still be corrupted, it just took much longer because the Scourge were practically mindless, which is true. I mean, that's ultimately it. The Scourge were, unlike the Forsaken, the Scourge were just animated corpses. The Scourge were no different to a book flying around the room because a wizard's making it do it. Trying to corrupt Scourge is like trying to corrupt a book, It's the mindlessness that made it more challenging to corrupt. I personally think that Sylvanas has been corrupted since she fell on top of the old god blood when she tried to kill herself. All they had to do is send some whispers to a troll on his deathbed and there you go. Their pawn now owns the might of an entire faction who unwittingly does what they want. Which is both interesting and uninteresting, but potentially true. Because, again, I say uninteresting only because it might be a recycled storyline, if so. But yeah, the idea, obviously... I'm super curious, and they'd better answer it in BfA, as to what it was that the lower spirits told Vol'jin, because Vol'jin said he chose Sylvanas not because he thought it was a great idea, but because the lower spirits have given him clarity, as he says, she must become the war chief. But what if it wasn't the lower spirits saying that? What if it was Old God Whispers? And again, that would be recycling a story, because then that would be exactly the same storyline as the Burning Legion pretending to be orc ancestors and whispering to Ner'zhul on Draenor when they were trying to get the orcs into a horde to attack Azeroth. So it would be exactly the same thing. But it's perfectly plausible, isn't it? It's absolutely plausible. The idea that Sylvanas has been corrupted is very plausible, of course, because her desires are very much in keeping with what the old gods would want. But that just goes to death in general. Again, when you read in Warcraft Chronicles what the aims of death are as a force, which of course is a combination of light and void, it's much more in tune with the desires of the void anyway. So it's almost like if it needs to corrupt anything, it doesn't really need to corrupt death that much, because death sort of wants to do what it wants to do anyway. But yeah, the concept that Vol'jin may have been the subject of old god whispers is interesting, and that he was sort of misguided as a result of that. And it could be true, because of course we're supposed to be finding a little bit more about that in BfA at some point, potentially later on. And of course, we're going to find it out on the Horde site. It's going to be a Horde quest, of course. Thrall taking the ashes of Vol'jin to Zandalar. And the whole Zandalar thing is very much, or Nazmir at any rate, very old godsy. There's a very strong old god storyline running through there, which is the storyline, I think, that's effectively going to be emerging throughout the expansion. So it's definitely possible that Sylvanas would be revealed to be a pawn of the old gods. That is absolutely plausible, I think. But yeah, in both interesting and uninteresting. Interesting because it may be a surprise to some people. Uninteresting because they would basically be regurgitating a story they've already done. But then I think there are some people that argue that there's only so many stories in the world anyway, aren't there? Most stories are just, you could argue, very similar to another story anyway. Very difficult to come up with genuinely unique stories. This one, I've been quite lukewarm about BfA for quite a while, mostly because it just feels bad to lose the artifact traits and legendary effects without anything really replacing them. Blizzard insisted on class buffs and slowing everyone down, neither of which I understand. Doesn't exactly make it any better. I appreciate the last minute efforts made by the class designers, but from what I'm seeing, it looks like I'll take a break from WoW, blah, blah, blah. I mean, yeah, this is what I was talking about before that I need to bring back. Losing the artifact traits. The legendary effects, I think, is more personal things. Some people will miss them, some won't. I don't. But yeah, the artifact traits, it was Blizzard deliberately, and they're saying it's their plan all along, which I have no reason to disbelieve, because their actions are in tune with that idea. So they're going to give us a load of stuff, and it was again their insistence that the things that the artifacts give us would be really powerful, because the artifacts are really powerful. And then they thought they could just take it away and we'd all be fine with it. And the argument for Thete is that, well, the artifacts were really powerful. Of course, it made our characters more powerful. Now we're going to have to get used to being a bit weaker. People don't like that. That's not advancement. Making your character weaker is not advancement. But that's unfortunately what's happening. So, of course, they were going to have a huge backlash for it, and they really shouldn't have done it. You know, it was absolute madness. In fact, the whole artifact thing in the first place wasn't really needed, because all it sounded to me like is someone thought it would be cool to have the Ashbringer in-game. That's what it sounded to me. And then they had to come up with a whole, obviously, Doomhammer. There were some of those weapons that already existed in the lore. Doomhammer, of course, although that meant nicking it off Thrall and emaciating him in the first place. And Thrall just had to become more pathetic, didn't he, for us to nick the Doomhammer off him. But yeah, I think it just started from that, and then someone thought, or maybe part of the thinking was, we're going to be defeating the Burning Legion. We ought to have something that's going to make it plausible. So some very, very powerful magical artifacts that are going to raise our power above the level of normal mortals. But I mean, the way you do that is the way they've done it in fights in the past anyway, raid fights in the past, and they did in this time anyway, and that you have powerful allies. When we were defeating Deathwing, we effectively had the other dragon aspects on our side. You know, and when we were defeating Argus, well, we had the Pantheon around us. Not doing a great deal. They occasionally gave us the odd buff. That was nice of them. They could have got off their fat asses and joined in, but no. They gave us a few buffs. But nonetheless, that was all explained. We didn't really need the artifacts storyline-wise, I don't think. Obviously, someone thought we did. But, you know, giving us powerful abilities, then taking them away, and then being surprised when people complain and going, oh, no, I see where the confusion is. And then they explain to us, yeah, but artifacts really powerful. So, of course, when you give up the artifacts, you're obviously going to give up that power. Yeah, that'll sort it. They'll understand that. And then, again, surprised when people go, no, I don't like being weaker, thanks. But, yeah, again, echoing the problems that the class designers face themselves. The class designers face themselves with problems that are not of their making. So I have infinite sympathy for, in particular, the new guys on it that are doing their best in impossible situations. You know, where's the art team? They always get, you know, each time new slate, no one really criticises the art team. Rightly so, because, you know, but it's also one of those things that everyone can enjoy, and they can do their new things each expansion. It's all fine. They don't have to inherit a mess from a previous one. Class designers, that's the worst job to have, really, isn't it? Okay, where's this one? Is this the next one? It says, again, channel-related one. So first I was kind of bummed out you wouldn't be doing TAR on Twitch. The Azeroth review. TAR, though, I thought, oh, I might have to nick that. I'll have to design something around that. I'd never really thought about that. Hashtag TAR. But anyway, wouldn't be doing it on Twitch. But after seeing more people interact and a load of questions you were getting, it was a great decision to move to YouTube. That's one of the most enjoyable Q&As to date. So, you know, and then that is it. That's ultimately the... Well, there's a couple of things that led me to doing the Azeroth review on YouTube. One is YouTube is where I do my stuff, and it obviously makes more sense. More people are likely to see that I'm doing something if I go live on YouTube than on Twitch. And the other thing, of course, is that it does have more people than coming on and therefore asking questions. There is a limit, though. It is one of those things. I don't know how it will refine. I'm sort of pleased in a way because there was a lot of people in the first week that I did it. And that meant there were certain things I didn't read because it kept coming too quickly. So there's certain things that got missed out. Then it's settled down a bit. It's still at least twice as many, up to 3 times as many people as were watching it on Twitch. So there's now a steady stream of people saying things, which is good. My fear is if you end up with loads more people watching it at some point, and again, it just gets rapid too much, because there's only so much you can do about that, and none of the solutions for it are terribly satisfactory. But anyway, glad you enjoyed it anyway. On to the sort of last one. I say sort of last one, it is the last one. It says, I agree with everything except... So this is about my discussion of... That's upside down. The book. Before the Storm. It says, agree with everything except I'm yet to see anyone point out Anduin's mistakes in the novel. He ignores the advices of advisors with no other reason that he knows better because of his magical bell pains. Which is not what you think if you don't know what that is. He also allows Kalia onto the field when that was clearly a very bad decision, again because his magical bell pains didn't go off. Anduin's pains are from the light, which clearly wanted all this to happen, judging by the prophetic statements it gives to Kalia, which comes true as a result of these events. Anduin is willing to ignore good advice and made clearly bad decisions based on his bell pains. And this could go, that's going to become a condition, isn't it? Bell pains. Go to the doctor, I've got bell pains, doctor. It could go very badly wrong, seeing the direction the game is going on in terms of the light not being 100% good. This is a very valid statement, indeed. I would call to question this thing about the good advice he's receiving. I'm not going to agree with that one, because I think the advice he was getting from his advisors were... Bear in mind, all the advisors that were against the plan were people who had been duffed over by the Scourge. So they were biased. Remember, there was one advisor who was all for this plan, and that was Velen. Now, you could argue Velen himself being a being of the light, you know, maybe he's just as biased on the light side of things. But also, I would look at it as he's also one of the only advisors whose people haven't been stuffed over by the Scourge. They haven't personally had that problem. But, you know, and also bear in mind, he did test the waters out by talking to the innkeeper and saying, well, look, in this situation, would you actually want to meet your brother? And the guy said yes. So I don't agree from that point of view. However, I do agree that he... And I think the whole point of those advisors all being against it was to show... I think it was there was a lot of development of Anduin in the book. And some of the devices used to do it were subtle and some were not so subtle. But I think this one was about him showing that he had the chops to be the king. Because the problem is, he'd always seemed a bit meek in the past. You know, he's become king as a hereditary thing. People haven't voted him king. And so he had to show you. And there was a couple of ways they did that. One was by him listening to his advisors, but ultimately going, no, we're going to do this. And the second was one when he basically told Gen Greymane, who was walking out on him, come back here, you're not turning your back on me, mate. So there were a few things there. And I think that was just to establish him as a credible leader. Because he's not just a leader of people, he's the leader of leaders. So he has to be developed along those lines. Because you wouldn't really believe in past expansions that Anduin was suitable for that role at all. Now, as to Kalia, I completely agree with that. That was stupid. That was asking for trouble, and I think you're quite right there. Bell pains or not, he should never, ever have allowed Kalia to go onto the field. Now, whether the Light really wanted the situation where Kalia reveals herself, I don't know. I don't know that it would be in the Light's plans that she become undead, because that's ultimately what happened. But it's possible. It is possible. But I do agree that he made a very, very bad judgment call in allowing Kalia on the field. Because that was something that could do no good and could only possibly cause problems. So, yeah, I'll agree with that one. But, again, the general idea of potentially Anduin and Kalia being manipulated by the light in the same way that others are manipulated by the void is possible. That is definitely possible there. So that is the mailbox for this week. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, if you want to do the where's the mailbox, you just need to say where. I'm bad at this. That mailbox is I need the settlement and the zone. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share. If you're subscribing, don't forget to click the bell notification as well, because that's an important thing these days. Until next time, I'll see you later.